here today with Dustin Abbott of 1,000 Word Images. We're going to learn a little bit about Dustin's journey in photography. Every journey has the beginning. So how and when did you start your adventure with photography, and what were your first steps?
Well, there's kind of two things that I would point to, and the first of those was growing up, my dad was into photography to some extent. We traveled a fair bit. And as a part of that, it was back in the days of slides. And so one of our kind of family's main pastimes is that we would watch slides, we would watch photos. And so I think there was kind of an osmosis process where I absorbed photography, at least in the way that he did it at that point. And so it was an important part of that. Then going back about 12, 13 years ago, I got a position with our religious organization, and part of that was media oriented. And so I started taking pictures, just kind of documenting events, and the bug caught me, and so took off from there.
Did you know from the moment you've taken your first picture what kind of photography that you like best and what's right for you? And what you like to capture the most and why, and what inspires you the most?
I wouldn't say that there's any one type of photography that really drives me. I'm more invested in what I'm doing at the moment. So if I'm out shooting landscapes, I love doing that. If I'm shooting macro photography, I'm into that. If I'm shooting portraits or weddings, it's more about being in the moment. And because I am a gear person and I'm constantly dealing with doing the reviews of different pieces of gear, I think part of the challenge that I like to accept is to get the best out of whatever I happen to be doing at the moment. So obviously if I'm testing a macro oriented lens, then I'm very focused on macro photography, and I want to to really test the gear, but also to challenge myself to see if I can get the best out of a piece of gear, whether it's extraordinarily expensive or if it's a cheaper product. I want to say that I've gotten something that I can be proud of with every piece of gear. And so whatever I'm happy to do at the moment, that's what I'm into, I'm oriented on.
What's your most memorable and the most exciting experience related to photography that helped you in understanding what photography is to you personally?
Well, as far as way that my photography has kind of evolved into becoming a gear reviewer, my wife and I will remember times when I kind of would express a dream of doing basically what I do today, and so I think that where that breakthrough really came is that I did some reviews of things that I owned myself, and it's pretty easy to get the product when you've spent the money to buy it yourself. So I just reviewed things that I personally owned, and then based on that little portfolio, I got one of the distributors here in Canada to take a shot on me and to send me a loaner lens. Now at this point, this was a loaner of a lens that had been on the market already for 7 or 8 months, and so it wasn't necessarily a new thing. But based on the strength of that and the fact that I applied myself and I think did a good job with it, when the next piece of gear was coming to market, in fact in this case before it was even released to the general population, they extended an invitation for me to spend some time with it. And so I had worked on that, and it was really, really exciting to be able to have in my hands something that people maybe knew existed but had never actually used. And so then when I got permission to even kind of release it a little bit early, before it even hit the market, and they kind of fudged the release day a little bit and let me go to market early. And Canon Rumors, the website, I had been talking to them, and so they featured that actual review. Well, I mean, for the first time I had a breakthrough in terms of traffic. In fact, so much traffic that I discovered that my website wasn't ready to handle it. And I basically broke my website. I lost a lot of sleep over it. But I realized at that point that I had the potential to really expand this and to be successful at it. And from that point, it kind of really began to build, and I may not have as much excitement over every piece of gear that comes through my hands, but every now and then there is something that I'm really personally excited about, and I get some of that same kind of feeling of it's fantastic to do what I do.
Can you remember any moment when you noticed the biggest change or improvement in your photos? Like, what helped you with that?
It wasn't really any, I wouldn't say a particular moment, but the one thing that I did that I've recommended to a lot of photographers since, and that is to look at a lot of photos, particularly those from people whose work you admire. And I am a firm believer that as you look at good work, it subconsciously influences you yourself. Not that you should become an imitator of someone else, but I think that if you start to understand what works in photography and what doesn't. There's a big difference between what your eye sees and what a camera sees. And there's obviously huge strengths to what we see visually, but there are also techniques you can use in photography that can produce something that is really visually interesting that your eye cannot do. And it's really kind of learning what worked in a photo, both in my own work, but also by looking at the work of people that I admire and seeing, what they've done something that's really, really fantastic. Now, what can I learn from that? What can I absorb from that? And I would say that and understanding how photography gear actually works. And on that note, I always encourage people also to actually learn things like aperture and the relationship between that and depth of field and things like that, because when you start to understand what actually takes place when you take a photograph, it really helps you to be able to visualize how to create, or maybe gives you the expertise to create what you can visualize in your mind. And so I think those two things really helped me a lot.
Speaking of techniques, can you give us some advice of something that worked for you that helped you track your progress and to keep you on going forward in your photography journey?
Well, I have tracked, obviously, I mostly came to become a photographer in the age in which we have, all in the internet age, basically. And so all along the way, there's metrics through a lot of, basically all the different places you might share your work. And so while I have tracked that, those metrics, and I think it does give you some feedback as to what works and what doesn't, I also have learned to kind of value my own inner voice in that, because I've shared some exceptional photos that weren't all that critically successful. And then I've shared some mediocre photos that were very, very successful. And so at the end of the day, I still know which is which. And so I'm not really moved by that. I don't want to do photography based on an algorithm. I've noticed that there are some people who are very successful on photo sharing sites that basically share variations of the same theme every time. They just do the same thing over and over again because they've determined that it's popular. I don't ever want to do that. I want to do the kind of photography that actually motivates me and not boil this down to some kind of algorithm that says, if I do this and I demonstrate it this way, I'm going to get a lot of, critical success for it. So in a sense, I would say that I value my own opinion more so than what I value the opinion of the crowd. And I think in many ways that's more of what being an artist is about.
They say that you can't grow without being challenged or without challenging yourself. So what is the most challenging part of photography for you, and how do you challenge yourself in that?
Well, one of the things I think I've personally, just maybe because of my personality type, is that I had to learn how to properly process criticism. And and to learn what is actually constructive criticism, things that I can grow from, and that which is just someone being small. And just, and out on the internet, people are anonymous. And so they say and they do things there that they wouldn't necessarily do in person. And so you really do have to learn to kind of parse out what is someone just being a troll, as we call them on the internet, and what is actually constructive in terms of criticism, something that I should have done better. Was that horizon actually crooked? And so for me, it's not becoming wounded by words that are just said by some person that's either jealous or just being abusive, but also to be open, so growing more thick-skinned. And I've had to do that more and more as I've become increasingly a public figure, and I have just access to a lot more people who can criticize me. And so you do have to develop thicker skin, but also I don't ever want to get to a place where you're kind of entitled or arrogant to where you think that you're above criticism, because a lot of what I've learned along the way, either on gear or in photography, has come from being challenged, doing research, and either reinforcing my position and articulating it better, or recognizing that I got something wrong and that I needed to grow from that. And so that's my takeaway. I think it's about how to properly handle criticism and to actually use it to become better.
Right. Last but not least, Dustin, if you could turn back time, restart your journey, what do you think you'd do differently? And think of it as advice from yourself now to when you first started in your journey in photography.
Sure. Well, I would say that the biggest thing that I would say for myself, and I would say to others, is that I would be quicker to sever ties or sever relationships with either companies or individuals that I didn't actually enjoy working with. When you started off, you're really hungry, you're really desperate for every opportunity that comes your way. And so as a result, in some of the early years, I persisted in relationships that made me miserable. I mean, I felt like people were kind of taking advantage of me, or they were poor communicators, and so I would be frustrated because I would follow up on something they had asked for, and then I'd hear nothing from them. And so it was really liberating when I recognized one day, you know what? I can walk away from this relationship. I don't have to be in this relationship, and got over that fear that if I wasn't in these, either poor or abusive, really, relationships, that that I could have no success. And so I think if I could go back, I would prioritize doing business with, interacting with people that I actually enjoy. And I'm really thankful there's tons of people in the photography industry all around the world that I really, really enjoy doing business with, people that I have great relationships with, that I enjoy communicating with, that I, learn from and grow with. And I'm very thankful that I'm not doing business with anybody at the moment that I don't enjoy doing business with them. And I think that if I could go back and redo it, I'd make that my policy faster.
Thank you for your time today, Dustin, and sharing your photography journey. So now, on the next interview, who would you like to see and learn about? Which photographer inspires you and we want to learn more about?
Well, there's another Canadian photographer by the name of Megan Lorenz, and you can find her at @mlorenzphotography on Instagram or www.mlorenzphotography.com. And what she does is she is a fantastic wildlife photographer. And here in Canada, which means that she's often out in harsh winter conditions, she gets fantastic wildlife shots. And she goes into a provincial park that's actually not far from where I live. And the reason why I really admire what she does is I could never do it. I do not have the patience to sit out in the blind and the cold for hours after hours just to nail that perfect shot. And she gets fantastic shots. And I say more power to her, because I would love to get the shot she does. I have zero interest in the process that I know it has to take for her to get that. And so I really admire what she does, because it is so different from what I do. I talked about, shooting in the moment. Well, her moment, she has to wait a long time for them to arrive. And I think that's pretty awesome.
Thank you for sharing with us today, Dustin Abbott.
Thank you.